This video will give you an overview of one student learning project. This one was created for the Deaf Ed program. The student was in a clinical for that placement. So some of the examples you'll see here have to do with children signing words or things like that. In the beginning, you have a heading that says Pretests and Results. This teacher candidate had some flexibility with the student. She administered 3 pretests just to help her determine which area was the one of most need. She did one in math and one in reading and one specifically with sight words. And what she determined was that the child really needed most help with sight words. So that's how she determined it. You can see in the chart here listing the strengths and the weaknesses based on her pretest. I would like for you to include the pretest. This example is just an overview, so I want to see the pretest before you give it and make sure that you have done everything that's needed before the student sees it. In the final project, you'll want to include the test that you provided the student with the scoring. Next, it details how the sight word test was given. She used flashcards and from the Dolch word list. And so you can see very clearly that the results the student signed in this case used sign language for 12 out of 20 of the words. When the student missed 5 consecutive words, she stopped giving the test. And so just go through what were your requirements, how did you set it up to determine the strengths and weaknesses for the student. Here were the list of the words administered. The stars were by the words are the ones that they missed, and these were not given in this particular order. When you're turning in a project, there are many different curriculums available out there. So if you choose to give a pretest that is part of a curriculum and you're using it to create your own, which I do suggest you do, don't use the one that's already manufactured because your student will have his or her own individual needs. But don't assume that I know all of the curriculums, even though I'm familiar with most of them. Include enough information that I'll know what you're talking about. Here, the student has included a breakdown of the Dolch sight words. Even though I know what she's talking about, it is nice to have it within the project very clearly laid out. The next component is the long-term objective and the short-term objectives. Your long-term objective is where you want to be at the end of the project, where you want the student to achieve. And it's worded with 3 vital components. One is the condition, and then you need a behavior, and then you need a criteria. So this one has, when presented visually with 40 level A pre-primer Dolch words, there's your condition. In what condition will this occur? The student will read orally or sign. That's your behavior. You want them to read the words, or in this case, they want the child to sign the words. 40 out of 40 correctly. Here is your criteria. At what level will you determine mastery? Is it okay if the student misses 1 word? Is 39 out of 40 okay? Those are the things that you determine with your long-term objective. The next part, short-term objectives, are the baby steps that it will take you to get to the goal. So the student will first, starting with 15 out of 15. She determined this because the student got, a good amount of words correct. You don't want to start at 2 if your goal is 40. So you kind of have, this has to be determined on a case-by-case basis. But each short-term objective increases by 5 until she gets to 40. So notice that 20 out of 20 is going to include all of the words from the first short-term objective and just adding 5 more each time. You want to make sure that you spiral it so that you are continually reviewing all of the previous words if you choose to do something like this. Sight words or something. You can also do math if you choose to do multiplication tables or things like that. You want to continually review all of the content included in your previous objectives as you go along. All right, then she has this section on all of her probes and her graph. She clearly says, here's the words that I gave, on flashcards for short-term objective 1. Note that she also here has probe 1 in parentheses underneath. This means that you can't assume that the student's going to get to short-term objective 1 with 1 lesson every time. It may take a couple of lessons before the student reaches your goal. So here you can see short-term objective 1, probe 1. The goal was met. He read 15 out of 15 Dolch words when presented visually. if you scroll down, you see how there's a neat red divider, so it's easy for your eye to see the sections here. Short Term Objective 2 is going to fall between these two. So if you can do those sorts of things in your formatting, it does make it friendlier to the eye, and it looks more professional that way. You can see in Short-Term Objective 2, the student did need 2 sessions to meet the criteria of 20 out of 20 words correct. Here were the words added to Short-Term Objective 1, so we know that there were 15 before, and here's the 5 that we're adding. The first time around, the goal was not met. The student only read 16 of the words. So when taught again, the second time around, the student got 20 out of 20 words. So this continues each time. Each one of the subsequent goals, you can see that the student is reaching the goal each time they have a new goal. The Short-Term Objective 2 in this case was the only one that needed 2 lessons. Take a note here at Short-Term Objective 6. Because the short-term objective is the same as your long-term objective, then this probe served as also the post-test. And you can do that, where the probe for Short-Term Objective 6, if it's the same, or whatever short-term objective you have, however many it takes you to get to your long-term objective. If it is the same, then count that as both the probe and the post-test. The reinforcement, there has to be some kind of motivating factor for the student to work with you. With younger students, it is often just the novelty of having someone come in and work with them. Older students may need some kind of little Cersei. In this case, the student got a copy of the graph and a sticker each time so that they could show their teacher or their parent. And then at the end, when the long-term objective was met, the prize was a Lion King sticker book. So think about how you're going to reinforce your goal with the student who you choose to work with. All right, here is the graph that or a screenshot, a copy of the graph that was on some of Dr. Boggs' paperwork. Just wanted to show you what they look like. They don't have to be an Excel graph, though. If you're handy in that and you know how to do it, it does look nice. This one, you can tell, is just a graph that was written on. These dots appear to be computer drawn, but in many cases, as long as you have the ability to graph it, I always felt like a blank graph that I could fill out with the student worked better for me as a motivating tool. So don't feel like you have to have one that's all computer generated. What's most important to me here is that the student is learning and the student is recognizing how he or she is meeting a goal. Oftentimes, if you have the students actually draw the dots, it's even better. So each of these columns, what they look like are columns to me, are actually phase change lines in between. So as you go along, this is Short-Term Objective 1. There's a phase change because now the content of Short-Term Objective 2 has changed. You now have more words that are required. The y-axis going up, the vertical, is the number of words read aloud or signed. In this case, they were signed manually. Notice that at Short-Term Objective 6, you have the goal at 40. These lines represent the goal, and the dots represent student achievement. So in Short-Term Objective 1, the dot is on the goal line because the first time that the probe was given, the student met the goal. If you remember, in Short-Term Objective 2, it took 2 lessons for the student to achieve the goal. So the first lesson was here at 16. The second lesson is here on the goal line at 20. Take a note that these two are connected with a line. Within the same phase here, in Short-Term Objective 2, you can connect the dots so that you can see change over time. But when you change the phase, like if you go to Short-Term Objective 2 to Short-Term Objective 3, notice that there is no line connecting these. And that's because the content of the goal is different. So connect within the vertical column, within the phase, but not across phases. This is Dr. Boggs' handwriting, and I'll just second what she has to say here. If you graph with the student, and that's highly recommended, graph with the student or even get the student to graph his or her own achievement. It is reinforcing of what you're trying to do with the child. All right, take a look at these lesson plans. They are not very in-depth at all. You don't have to go and write 3 pages on what you're going to do in a session with the student. You need to have the objective, and it's as simple as short-term objective 1, if that is your objective. If you want them to do more with it, like write sentences or things like that, then you'll just need to note that additional objective. You have the procedure, and then you have how are you going to evaluate it. And each time you have some sort of probe to evaluate your short-term objective. So you can see that here the student is just doing a dot to dot. It's a little game. As they say the word, they get to connect a dot. So it's a little game there as a motivator. Let's see. The next one here, the student thinks of a place they'd like to go. I'd like to go to my grandma's house. And so we're going to draw a little picture of grandma's house, and I'm going to line up the cards all the way to the picture, and you have to read them correctly to get to grandma's house. This student also, or this teacher candidate also wanted the student to make sentences, so she just added that as an additional goal, and then the procedures, and then over here how she was going to assess it. So you can see that each one is fairly simple as you go through. I must not have all of an example. You'll have one of these lessons for each short-term objective. You'll need a lesson plan for. And if you want to put it in a chart like this, that's fine. I'm not sure why this one's cut off, but you will need a lesson plan for each one of yours. The post-test here, we have repeat of the goal, and it says here refer to pretest for the word list, and here's the results. Not only did the student read all of the first column, but they also read 5 words from the level B, and here were the 5 additional words. But take a look at the graph here. For yours, unless you have 2 long-term objectives, you won't need 2 graphs. I just wanted to show you that different goals still look the same on paper as a graph. This is a post-test results in reading, and then this is post-test results in comprehension. That you can do the same kind of thing if you want to work on main idea. Then we have short passages we read, and then we do a post-test just finding the main idea of certain passages. But what's done here is the first column is the pretest. The second column is the post-test. And then you take a percentage and say, like here, 76% of words were read correctly in the pretest, 96% read correctly in the post-test, is a gain of 20%. And the same thing over here, a pretest and a post-test. So if you only have one long-term objective, you only need one of these graphs to show pretest and post-test comparisons. That's all I have in this example. Like I said, it's abbreviated. You're going to want to make sure that you have your graphs and you also have a reflection. Take a look at the rubric that's in the pretest, because that will really guide you on the requirements and how to go about meeting those requirements. But like I said, you know how to contact me, so if you have any questions, just feel free to text or email.